Auburn University in 2017. After receiving her degree, she moved to South Carolina and accepted a position as a marine science instructor at Camp Seawee, Clemson University's Marine Science Camp. It was there that she learned about and applied to the College of Charleston EVSS program. During her time as a graduate student, Maggie was a teacher assistant for the biology department. She served as a social chair for the EVSS Program Student Association. She worked as a graduate assistant for the Office of Research and Grants Administration, and she completed her internship and research with Charleston Waterkeeper. She has 5 committee members. Do you want me to also say these two? Okay, fantastic. I'm the academic advisor, Dr. Tracey Hunter-Doniger from EHHP. The internship supervisor, Cheryl Carmack, staff scientist and volunteer coordinator for Charleston Waterkeeper, Dr. William Veal, School of EHHP, Dr. Maida Van Sickle, School of EHHP, and Cindy Hall, community coordinator for NASA Earth Science Data Systems.
Yay. Thank you, Tracey, so much for that introduction. Thank you so much to everyone who could make it today. This is an incredible turnout. I'm so excited to share my research with everybody. I am going to go ahead and talk while I share my screen. And when I do so, I'm also going to turn off my camera just so that there's no lagging as I present. So we will just go ahead and get started. This is the development of an environmental education program within a nonprofit organization and the evaluation of adult participants. So before I get the ball rolling, I really wanted to acknowledge those who were so influential during this process. First, of course, my 5 amazing committee members. Thank you, each and every one of you, for sticking with me these last couple years. I really appreciate it. I also want to thank the Charleston Waterkeeper team for giving me this internship opportunity 2.5 years ago. That team is Cheryl Carmack, Andrew Wonderly, and Abby Boyer. And last but certainly not least, I wanted to acknowledge my more informal support system. While these individuals didn't directly contribute to my work, they certainly affected me and my knowledge and ability to produce this work, not the least of which is my faith in God. So thank you to every single one of you. I could not have accomplished this milestone without all your help. So as I go through this presentation, I ask that you bear with me, as this is an attempt at a summary of my master research. So if at any time during this presentation you need more clarity or have a question about part of my research, please feel free to ask at the end of this presentation, and I'd be happy to give you more information as I can. So human activity is negatively impacting our water systems. These water systems that are more susceptible to these negative impacts are those areas within coastal counties. Now that is where over 1/3 of Americans live. Because of this, it is necessary to understand the public's awareness to this growing problem, as well as educate about the solutions to that problem. One way we can educate individuals about the environment is through this idea of place-based environmental education. Now, this form of education teaches individuals directly within the location about which they are learning. One example of an organization that would benefit from the development and evaluation of a place-based environmental education program is Charleston Waterkeeper. Charleston Waterkeeper is an environmental nonprofit organization that was founded in 2009 and is currently based in Charleston, South Carolina. The organization's mission is to protect and restore waterways within the Charleston, Berkeley, and Dorchester Tri-County areas for the surrounding community and its future generations. The organization has 5 specific types of outreach events, which are listed on this slide. The 2 event types that you see marked with asterisks, the volunteering and outreach education event types, those 2 are considered place-based environmental education events. Now, this research was heavily centered around the volunteering outreach events. These events include marsh, highway, and forest cleanups, oyster reef construction, which is pictured on the left of this slide, oyster shell sorting, and oyster shell bagging. Now, unfortunately, efforts to educate individuals at these outreach events are not meeting the organization's desired data-driven standards. This can be due to a number of reasons, but some of which could be because the activities included at these events were developed without research. Education at these events is often informal and unstructured, and there have been no efforts to evaluate these events or their activities for determining their effectiveness. Because of this study focused on improving Charleston Waterkeeper's education efforts. There were 2 goals for this research. The first was to develop an environmental education program for Charleston Waterkeeper that can be modified based on the type of outreach event and catered to a specific age group. The second research goal was to evaluate adult participants to better understand the successfulness of a Charleston Waterkeeper outreach event intervention. Now, 2 research questions were expected to be answered upon accomplishing this second goal. The first research question was, how did the adult participants' attitudes towards the environment change due to a Charleston Waterkeeper outreach event intervention? And second, how did the adult participants' knowledge about Charleston Waterkeeper change due to an outreach event intervention? Because this research included both quantitative and qualitative data and produced a study sample that was much smaller than intended, case study research was used within this study. It is important to note that case study research is designed specifically for a small population, and it is not used to make inferences to a larger population. The environmental education program was developed specifically for Charleston Waterkeeper to utilize during each outreach event. During development, several sources were utilized, included in this slide, all of which were extremely research focused. The volunteering outreach event type was the focus of the evaluative portion of this study. These events were chosen because they are the organization's most frequently hosted outreach events. They are place-based environmental education events, and they directly align with Charleston Waterkeeper's 3 overarching goals. Now, those 3 goals are to first protect and restore waterways in the Tri-County region. Second, to educate the public about these local environments. And third, create a knowledgeable and engaged public who are actively passionate about protecting local waterways. Data was collected from the 6 outreach events that are listed in this table, the first 5 of which are volunteer-based outreach events, and you can see they align with all 3 of the organization's overarching goals. Because research regarding adult-centered environmental education is very limited, and the majority of volunteers and participants at Charleston Waterkeeper outreach events are adults, only adult participants were evaluated for this case study. Outreach events were made public on several platforms in an attempt for all residents to be given equal opportunity to participate. 3 data collection methods were chosen for this study: pre and post surveys, participant observations, and artifacts. Adults were administered a pre-survey prior to participating in an outreach event and a post-survey after participation. Surveys were anonymous, and the pre-survey questions and statements were identical to the post-survey questions and statements. The survey consisted of 5 general questions, 3 open-ended questions, 7 multiple choice statements, and 1 optional open-ended question in that order. And I'll briefly take you through that survey now. So the beginning 5 questions asked for demographic and background information about the participant while still allowing anonymity. The 3 open-ended questions followed, and they allowed participants to demonstrate their knowledge of Charleston Waterkeeper. And then the 7 multiple choice statements followed, and they were based on a 5-point Likert scale that ranged from strongly agree to strongly disagree. Now, these statements assessed participants' attitudes towards the Tri-County region's waterways, as well as the environment in general. And then the final open-ended question, which is number 16 on the survey, was optional, and it gave participants the opportunity to provide any direct comments or feedback about Charleston Waterkeeper as an organization. Participant observations and artifacts were used in this case study to help triangulate data and interpretation. Participant observations occurred during predetermined outreach events, and they consisted of recording field notes on a computer during the majority of the event. Artifacts collected for this case study included photographs taken of adults participating in the outreach event, photographs of the event location, as well as debris report forms. During a Charleston Waterkeeper cleanup event, volunteers use debris report forms to record the quantity and the quality of the trash items that they found. The quantitative data analyzed within this case study were pre and post survey data from the 5 general questions and the 7 Likert scale multiple choice statements. Data were sorted and analyzed in 3 different sets: pre-surveys alone, post-surveys alone, and a comparison between pre and post surveys. These questions and statements were organized into one master Excel sheet, and the answers to each question and statement were then replaced and tagged with a number in that Excel sheet. So for example, the general question, "How old are you?" which is labeled age in the table on this slide, had 4 options. Let's say a survey respondent chose option 18 to 35. Their answer was replaced and tagged with a number 2. Descriptive statistics were first performed on each pre and post survey question and statement. And then a paired sample t-test was performed to compare each pre-survey multiple choice statement to its identical post-survey multiple choice statement. In total, 7 t-tests were performed, and they were done so to determine if there was a statistically significant change in attitude or response to the survey statements due to a Charleston Waterkeeper outreach event intervention. A final t-test for the sum of all 7 multiple choice statements was performed to determine the overall change in attitudes of adult participants. The qualitative data analyzed within this case study were the 4 open-ended survey questions, the participant observations, and the artifacts. After compiling all respondents' answers for each open-ended survey question in a Word document, a table was created with themes and definitions that emerged and developed as similar answers were grouped together. These tables were used to compare the pre-survey themes and definitions with the post-survey themes and definitions, as well as to observe those that may have changed, emerged, or disappeared. Participant observations and artifacts were utilized in combination with survey data to evaluate if and how knowledge and attitudes may have changed after an outreach event intervention. The completed 68-page document, which is not uniquely titled Environmental Education Program, now serves as the official program for Charleston Waterkeeper to be used at all of the organization's outreach events. The program is organized based on the 5 types of outreach events. Those 5 are volunteering, outreach volunteering, education, outreach education, and development. And each event type has its own section and curriculum. For reference and as an example, I'll be showing you brief sections of the volunteering portion of the environmental education program. So included in each section is first an overview of the outreach event type. Second included are specific examples of events. So for the volunteering outreach event type, you have marsh cleanups, highway cleanups, and so on. Also included, and this is more of the meat of each section, are the important educational content that should be incorporated before, during, and after event activities. And then when applicable, addressed state science standards are also included. And then finally, relevant resources are included, and these are worksheets, forms, pictures, and websites. Now this section is the quick review section, and these are brief summations of the content described in detail in the outreach event type sections. Quick review is beneficial right before or during an outreach event because staff, interns, and volunteers can use this section to make sure that they're relaying the correct event and age-specific educational content. Among the 58 pre-surveys that were received during data collection, there were 6 incomplete surveys. Those 6 were removed, and the data was analyzed based on 52 respondents. The average age range of participants was 36 to 55, and the majority of respondents lived in North Charleston. When creating tables for the descriptive statistics, each survey statement was given a code word or words. So for reference, and before I show you those descriptive statistic tables, these are the 7 survey statements and their respective code words. So results from the pre-survey multiple choice statements were overwhelmingly positive. Before participating in an outreach event, pre-survey respondents chose strongly agree on 5 of the 7 statements, agree on 1 statement, and neutral on the final statement. Out of the 26 post surveys received during data collection, 3 were incomplete and 1 was completed by a participant who was under the age of 18. Those 4 surveys were removed and the data were analyzed using the remaining 22 post surveys. Similar to the pre-surveys, the average age range of post-survey respondents was 36 to 55. However, the majority lived on a barrier island. Similar to the pre-survey, results from the post-survey multiple choice statements were also overwhelmingly positive. The red arrows indicate the only 2 changes that occurred in the mean answer. So for the statement, I pick up trash that I find when walking on the beach, which is labeled trash in this table. The majority of respondents chose agree in the pre-survey and then chose strongly agree in the post-survey. And then for the statement, participating in this event has made me more passionate about being a steward for the environment, which is labeled passionate in this table. The mean answer in the pre-survey was strongly agree, and then agree in the post-survey. Among the 58 pre-surveys and 26 post-surveys that were received during data collection, 21 participants fully completed both the pre and post-survey. So t-tests were performed using only those 42 surveys. Now the 7 t-test results comparing each pre and post survey multiple choice statement did not produce statistically significant changes in the mean scores. For example, the results from the highlighted statement, I directly contribute to the pollution problem, indicate that participation in a Charleston Waterkeeper outreach event did not produce a statistically significant change in the respondents' attitudes towards their individual roles in the pollution problem. Again, a final t-test for the sum of all 7 multiple choice statements was performed, and the results of that t-test also did not produce a statistically significant overall change in respondents' attitudes. 2 participant observations were performed, and the artifacts obtained during those observations included 7 debris report forms completed by adult participants, as well as 12 photographs, 6 of which were taken during the Hendricks Park cleanup, and the remaining 6 were taken during the major donor event. Now, regarding the qualitative data from these surveys, 3 themes emerged from respondents' answers to the first open-ended question, which is, what is a waterkeeper? Those 3 themes were environmentalist, educator, and organization in the pre-survey, and nonprofit in the post-survey. 4 themes emerged based on respondents' answers to the second open-ended question, which was list 3 ways you can be a waterkeeper for local waterways. Those themes were waste reducer, volunteer, educator, and advocate. And for the third and final open-ended question, research, political, educate, and improve are the 4 themes that emerged from the pre-survey, and research, political, and educate are the 3 themes that emerged from the post-survey. So we'll start with the attitude summary. Evaluated results from the quantitative and qualitative data suggest that the environmental attitudes of adult participants did not improve as a result of an outreach event intervention with Charleston Waterkeeper. Now, this lack of attitudinal change can be attributed to 2 factors. The first is that adults' attitudes were already positively developed prior to their participation in a Charleston Waterkeeper outreach event. And this can be seen in the answers that participants provided in the pre-survey. So when taking the pre-survey, adults chose strongly agree or agree for every Likert scale multiple choice statement except 1. Choosing strongly agree or agree on these statements in the pre-survey indicates that adult respondents had a positive attitude towards the environment and environmental action before participating in an outreach event. However, despite these overwhelmingly positive results, the t-tests conducted were not statistically significant. This indicates that adult respondents' attitudes did not significantly change after participating in an outreach event. The lack of attitudinal improvement can also be attributed to the fact that in some cases, an outreach event intervention caused adults' attitudes to slightly change. So for example, the second open-ended survey question on this slide, when comparing the themes and definitions that emerged from the pre-survey to the themes and definitions that emerged from the post-survey, you can see that adult respondents' answers to the post-survey open-ended question decreased in quality. This can be seen in all the themes that emerged from this survey question, but I'll use the theme volunteer as an example. So you can see in the pre-survey, the theme volunteer mentioned or included volunteering, attending cleanup events, participating in oyster volunteer events, and or getting involved in water quality testing and or sampling. Now in the post-survey, participants only included volunteering and or attending cleanup events in their answers. One potential explanation for the slightly negative change in attitudes after an outreach event intervention could be the event experience in which adults participated. So for example, A volunteer may be less inclined to include something like participating in oyster volunteer events as a way to be a waterkeeper if they had just finished participating in a forest cleanup. Despite the lack of attitudinal improvement, there was one survey statement that provided unique results. In both the pre and post surveys, adult respondents chose neutral on the statement, "I directly contribute to the pollution problem." Now, choosing neutral on this statement in the pre-survey suggests that participants were initially unaware that their individual and daily actions can directly affect the natural environment. And choosing neutral again in the post-survey suggests there was no improvement in those attitudes. The results from this statement alone illustrate one area in which participants do need more education, and it provides a specific way for Charleston Waterkeeper to improve its education efforts. Similar to participants' attitudes, evaluated results suggest that adults' knowledge generally did not improve as a result of an outreach event intervention with Charleston Waterkeeper. The majority of comparisons between pre and post-survey answers showed little to no change in the developed themes and the subsequent definitions. However, answers to the open-ended questions in the pre-survey do highlight that this lack of improvement could be because adults' knowledge were already developed prior to their participation. So take, for example, the themes and definitions that emerged based on the answers that respondents gave for the third open-ended survey question. These well thought out answers that respondents gave resulted in clear themes and well-structured definitions that you can see in this table. This suggests that adults' knowledge of Charleston Waterkeeper and its mission were already developed prior to their participation. However, two promising changes in respondents' answers did occur within this case study. One of these changes was a disappearance of a theme, which is seen in this open-ended question. The theme of improvement appeared in the respondents' pre-survey answers, but it did not appear in their post-survey answers. The absence of improvement as a theme in the post-survey suggests that at some point during an outreach event, adult participants learned that Charleston Waterkeeper does not use the collected data to improve as an organization. This shift in understanding could be the direct result of adults taking part in the data collection process firsthand, which is shown in the excerpt from one of the participant observations, as well as the image on the right of this slide. This altered understanding is promising, and it demonstrates that an outreach event intervention could slightly improve adults' knowledge of Charleston Waterkeeper. However, the majority of data illustrate that an outreach event intervention did not significantly improve adults' knowledge about the organization. Now, based on respondents' answers, there was a major theme that emerged from all three open-ended questions in both the pre and post surveys, and that was this idea of education. The emergence of this major theme has two implications regarding participants' knowledge and attitudes. First, this theme implies that adult participants had strong attitudes towards the importance of environmental education, both before and after an outreach event intervention. Second, this theme implies that adults' knowledge of Charleston Waterkeeper includes this expectation that the organization focuses a lot on education. But because these positive attitudes and knowledge neither changed nor improved, Charleston Waterkeeper may not be accomplishing one of its main overarching goals, which is to educate the public. The organization, therefore, has a responsibility to reevaluate and revamp its education efforts. There were two major factors that had significantly noticeable impacts on this case study. The first was that despite providing multiple opportunities, it was incredibly difficult to motivate adult participants to complete the post survey after they had finished an outreach event. This obstacle is one explanation for the quantity and quality of completed post surveys compared to completed pre-surveys. And second, and most obviously notable factor that affected this case study was COVID-19. Data for this research were intended to be collected from January to May of this year, and it included a target sample size of 300 participants and 5 participant observations. Because of the global pandemic, this research was obviously halted, and that resulted in a significantly smaller amount of data collected, as well as the methodologies having to be adjusted. So keeping in mind this goal of the internship being to improve the organization's education efforts, Charleston Waterkeeper should consider several recommendations, but I'll focus on just the 3 that are on this slide. Based on respondents' answers to the survey statement, I directly contribute to the pollution problem. The organization should place more emphasis on educating adults about how their individual actions can impact the environment. The organization should also dedicate specific timeframes at each outreach event for educational purposes, as well as use the developed environmental education program during those allotted times. For future research, this study needs to be repeated without the interruption of COVID-19, and methodologies should be improved upon, specifically ways to elicit more and fully completed survey responses. Finally, future research should also include the evaluation of child participants, as well as outreach events that are specifically catered towards children. To conclude, there are 3 key takeaways from this case study. Now, the first is that having adults participate in a Charleston Waterkeeper outreach event does not improve their attitudes towards the environment, nor does it improve their knowledge about the organization. The second takeaway is that the accumulation of data suggests that adults' knowledge and attitudes were positively established and well developed prior to an outreach event intervention. Now, this could be caused by multifaceted involvement with Charleston Waterkeeper over an extended period of time. This type of involvement includes people attending multiple volunteer events, engaging with the organization on its social media channels, as well as having conversations with others about the organization. So this type of involvement could explain these initially positive attitudes and adequate knowledge. But most importantly, the third and final takeaway from this case study is that more work needs to be done within the organization and during outreach events to better educate individuals. This concludes my presentation, and I am now happy to answer any questions that you guys may have.
You are welcome to either raise your hand and ask a question, speak up and ask a question, or you can ask a question via the chat at the bottom.
So I have a question. If my hand, I don't know if that's like clapping, that finally is removed. And so thanks so much, Maggie. You know, you did such a great job. And obviously at the very end of your research path, COVID has, you know, sort of cut a little bit at the end of your data collection period. But despite that, you did such a great job on analyzing this. And I have a question, right? So it seems like with your research sort of shows that Waterkeeper is in a way preaching to the choir, right? The people coming to their events are already invested in the idea of environmental ed and already sort of very pro waterkeeper and pro clean waters. And so, well, I guess there's a couple things. One is, given that audience, do you have any thoughts about how you might change your research questions to, instead of just asking, are their attitudes improved? Can you ask, do you think you can ask something else, or could have asked something else of that same audience, so that Waterkeeper can still maybe eventually someday utilize that particular, choir that they've, got come into their events to help inform their work? So I'll just leave it at that. That's my question. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, part one and part two. Yeah, that's an excellent question. I'll kind of tackle it with a couple of answers. I definitely would have changed, just in general, a few components of the survey. I think, given the audience, I think it was a little long, and I think that was one of the reasons we got some of the answers that we received. So I definitely would change that even before the question that you posed. But I definitely think there's an opportunity, based on the results we got, to get more feedback from those survey respondents, especially after the results that we got. So these adults are coming into this event having already known and are super excited about Charleston Waterkeeper as an organization, that they're there for a reason. They want to improve the environment, so they already know why they're there. I think what we could change or potentially add into this survey is more feedback opportunities. So asking, what do they enjoy about educational components at these environmental volunteering events? What do they not enjoy? What do they wish they would see more of? I think there's a really good opportunity to get actual feedback, in those survey responses.
Thanks so much.
Mm-hmm.
Maggie, it looks like you have a few questions coming in from the chat. The first one is from Meta, and she asked, how much did the qualitative data help explain the non-parametric statistics?
Yeah, so the qualitative data was really good for getting more opinionated answers from survey respondents. I think it's kind of a double-edged sword when you ask for Likert scale multiple choice responses, because you might not be getting the most clear answer. You might be getting answers that adults think is the right answer. But with these open-ended questions, and even more specifically the participant observations, you really got a feel for the attitudes that respondents came into this event, and the attitudes during the event, as well as the attitudes as they were leaving the event. So you could kind of compare the two, or converge the two together, and really triangulate that data, instead of just getting a response from just a 10, 15 question survey. Oh, sorry, I should probably read that. What was the, oh, okay, from Zach. Yeah, that's a great question. So Zach asked, do you think that incentives or rewards would have made people more willing to do the post survey? And that's an excellent observation, because that is something I included in my manuscript, and something that Cheryl and I had talked about, I would say around February or March, I think, Cheryl, if I'm correct, is that we noticed that we weren't really getting a lot of survey responses. And, we thought about why, or maybe how could we get more? And so there was a discussion of potentially putting in an incentive, like some sort of Charleston Waterkeeper gift, to create maybe a bigger incentive to create or to finish these surveys. So I definitely think it would have been a really good opportunity, but we weren't able to because of COVID. We stopped all those volunteering events. But that was definitely something that we thought about during the data collection.
Maggie, I have a question. Based upon your theoretical framework of having this a place-based educational program, how important was it that Charleston Waterkeepers is here in Charleston and all of your participants were local to Charleston? If you had done this type of study somewhere else, how important is place-based education?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll try and tread lightly because I can't make inferences to kind of a larger population, but from the data we collected and from the unique opportunity I had to internship with Charleston Waterkeeper, I really got a feel for the people who are volunteering, and the people who live in Charleston, at least who volunteered and took this survey and participated in these events. They're incredibly motivated to keep their city clean. And I don't want to make inferences, but it just seems like there's this large understanding and this large desire to keep the city of Charleston clean. And so I don't know. So if you take it to another location like a small city in Iowa, the idea of place-based environmental education may not be as important. So the fact that this was done in Charleston with people who were local to the city, I think is a great explanation for why we got the positive attitudes and the well understood knowledge that we did, definitely. Andrew, my brother, asked, wonder if political party affiliation could impact surveys as well. And thanks, Andrew. That's also an excellent point and something that we didn't include in our first 5 demographic questions. So I can't speculate on, how it could have impacted, but it's certainly something that future research could look into, is that political party affiliation and if it does affect how you feel and what you know about the environment.
Maggie, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Excellent. By the way, excellent job.
Thank you.
Well done. I'm very proud of you. My question is, after this whole thing is done, given that you had to deal with COVID and everything went askew and you had not exactly the amount of data that you wanted, what is your own personal takeaway of doing research like this or doing things with the environment or working with a nonprofit? What was your favorite part about doing this that you think that you're going to bring into your future jobs going forth?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll answer, what I enjoy the most first, and then I'll talk about, what I'll bring to the table. I really enjoyed. Really, thank you, Waterkeeper, for getting thrown into that internship. I really was I walked in one day and I immediately had a volunteer event that I got to participate in like that weekend. And so really getting that inside look into an environmental nonprofit, I think is an experience that a lot of people don't really get. And so I loved volunteering at every single event with Waterkeeper and really getting that secret inside scoop. So that was my favorite part. I think what I'll take away mostly, especially about research around environmental education and nonprofits, is just that it's so important to do these types of studies because I think environmental organizations and environmental nonprofits, they're so small to begin with. They're such a tight-knit, really hard-working team that I think it's easy to not get lost, but put certain aspects of your organization on the back burner. And so sometimes I think it's good to kind of stop and evaluate and make changes for the future. So I think that's just definitely something I'll bring, is it's always, always super important to stop and evaluate and make changes as you go along.
Excellent job. Eugene has a question. Is that your brother, dad? What kind
My
of
dad.
Okay. Go on, Eugene, take it away.
Oh, thanks, Tracy. I'll take brother. That works too. Maggie, just awesome, awesome job. I had a question that kind of drives at the heart of the challenge of I think what your whole effort is about at COC and beyond, is this notion of accountability. And you kind of touched on it with the no change in responsibility perception from pre and post. And that was with people who are presumably, like Dr. Veal said, you know, they're, and others, they're engaged, they're there, you know, they're local, you know, they have every reason to be, but they're not really seeing as necessarily, you know, any ownership of the problem personally. So I'm just wondering, did you gain any more insight that you can share with the group on that particular aspect? Or if not, how do you get to that point? Because ultimately, altruism, you know, in the greater sense, doesn't always drive individual behavior.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an excellent question. And it's a reason why I brought it up so much in my manuscript, is, you know, this idea of your individual role and owning that responsibility to protect the environment. And I think we clearly saw, like you said, that responsibility is absent or non-existent. And so I think one of the reasons why, you know, maybe I can't speculate as to why maybe they showed up with that lack of responsibility, but I did notice that during these outreach events, you know, most of the participants participated in a cleanup event. So they come in, they learn a little bit about what they're doing, and then they go clean up a certain area, and then they're done. So I think there's kind of a space or a lacking there on educating individual roles outside of that volunteer event. So it's great that you're coming and you're cleaning up this environment and you're participating with a great organization, but what are you going to do after the fact? What are you going to do when you get home? And I think there's a really, really good opportunity to somehow incorporate individual roles into educating at those events, whether that be taking a few of those trash items and explaining what they are and how they got into the environment and what people can do to prevent it from getting into the environment, or whether it be some other activity. But I think there's a perfect opportunity to fix that responsibility and to make that responsibility aware for those people. Because like you said, it's so important what people do outside of these volunteering events.
Hey, Nicole has another question. Or not another question, she has a question. And it's kind of a follow-up question to everything that we've been talking about. And she said that the participants from this already had well-established attitudes and knowledge on Charleston Waterkeeper before the event. How did you give any thought to bringing people who maybe didn't already have those, you know, attitudes and thoughts? Have you?
Yeah. That's awesome. That's a great question. And it's something I touched in my manuscript, but didn't put it in the presentation. So I'm glad you asked that question. There's a couple of things I think could be improved upon. First of which was the platforms that the surveys were made public. So I have a list. So we made these surveys and outreach events public on Charleston Waterkeeper's website, their social media channels, the organization's volunteer emails, partner organization communications, so like South Carolina Department of Natural Resources, and the EVSS program's monthly newsletter. So if you look at all those and you just take a listen, you'll notice that most of them are all from the organization. So all these outlooks and all these platforms are being visited by people who are already aware of Charleston Waterkeeper. So I think that's one reason why we got such positive and well-developed attitudes and knowledge, is because we weren't doing enough, or I wasn't doing enough to promote these outreach events to people who have never heard of the organization. And so that's one thing that I would certainly improve upon if this study would be replicated, is to find ways to get people to put those outreach events and those surveys out on people who have never heard of the organization. The second thing that definitely could change is that, if you'll remember, the average age range of survey respondents was 36 to 55 years old. So these 36 to 55-year-olds, I believe, are repeat volunteers. So they're coming because they enjoy these volunteer events. They're the same age every time they come. And I think the organization is missing that 35 younger generation. And I think one way to improve that is through the organization's social media channels. I think the channels have a great message in mind. They're posting frequently, but I think eliciting a younger generation, I think that those platforms are outdated. And I think there's room there to improve the Facebook page, to improve the Instagram account, so that we're putting it out for teenagers, for people my age, because social media is such an ever-changing, quick-paced environment that people my age are just always scrolling through, and they're looking for the most interesting thing that they can find. And I think Charleston Waterkeeper can monopolize on that opportunity to get survey respondents who are younger, and to get people to volunteer who have never volunteered with Charleston Waterkeeper before. That was a long answer. I hope that answered your question. I see Dr. Veal.
Yeah, I have another question. I want to follow up on what Andrew asked earlier, not necessarily political parties, but I do know that political was one of your themes in your post survey. And I was wondering if you could just elaborate on what exactly that meant and what you learned from the post surveys in terms of the political theme.
Yeah, great question. I believe the theme of political came up in the question, what is a waterkeeper? So this came to fruition, I believe, in both the pre and post surveys. So survey respondents had this notion, this idea, this expectation that Waterkeeper fights for waterways, and they do that through politics. So they're going to make changes, they're going to improve policies that are affecting our environment. So certainly, like Andrew said, it could be political affiliation, but maybe even more so, it's more focused on what Charleston Waterkeeper is doing as an organization. So these adult respondents are already aware and post-aware that the organization is heavily focused on improving the environment through political outreach. So yeah, that's definitely something that we found that was very clear in those survey responses. So thank you for bringing that up. Yeah.
We have another question here from Zach. I feel like I want to NPR. What's next for you, Maggie? PhD, job, Peace Corps, long vacation?
Oh, Zach, you're so inquisitive. The short answer to that is I have no idea. I think I'm done with school for the end of time. So no PhD. I'm definitely interested in environmental coordinator positions, environmental manager positions, those positions that are in companies or organizations that are kind of the front leader of these education efforts, these outreach efforts, just trying to make the company better and to make the surrounding city better. So I'm definitely applying. So TBD on future plans. No problem.
Are there any more questions?
Yes, we do have a question. Someone had their hand up.
Yeah, Jamili, I think she just went to it's in the chat.
Oh.
So Jamili asked, was there any discussion about researching or surveying the worldviews of the participants? I wonder if there would be better ways to present the education material if you were able to gauge how they perceive the world. Yeah, so we definitely didn't have questions like that that were more worldview focused in the surveys. I think we were more interested in how participants felt locally about Charleston and about protecting Charleston specifically. But certainly future research could look into just worldview in general. And I think that touches on just general how people feel about the environment now, how they feel about it in the past and in the future. So that's definitely a good thought for future research.
Maggie, if I can jump in here. Charleston Waterkeeper is so grateful for all the work you've done and the amazing product from this research. We're really grateful. So let's say Charleston Waterkeeper takes all your suggestions and we're able to effectively implement our new education program. Thank you. How would you expect your results to change, or how would they look if you were to do this project a year from now?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Unfortunately, I would expect the attitudes not to change since they're positive already. They should stay positive. If they do change, every answer should be strongly agree. But then in the more open-ended questions, I would definitely expect respondents' answers to improve. So we always want to be changing, or not changing, but educating respondents as they learn. So the organization is already doing a fantastic job in getting survey respondents who are well aware of Charleston Waterkeeper, but I'm not sure whether they're well aware of the bad impacts that are happening in the environment. So I'm not sure if it would be nice to compare the survey to the same survey a year from now, but I think the survey could be improved upon and we could start asking more questions that are reflective of the environmental education program. So the specific educational components that are included in that program, we want to see if they're really beneficial and they're really teaching individuals who volunteer about the environment. So that would be a really good way to see if it's working. But we definitely would want to see just general improvement over time. And then maybe for that last question, number 16, which was any optional comments or feedback for Charleston Waterkeeper, maybe there's opportunity for more comments and more feedback about specifically the environmental education program and how it could improve. Bye, Susan.
Are there any other questions from the general public? Okay, well, if not, terrific job, Maggie. I am going to ask that all of our general attendees please exit, and all committee members please stay present.
Good job, Maggie.